Zygon died today. Or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure. The words rise unbidden in my mind as though I am rehearsing a confession to a priest I do not believe in. It should be simple enough. The Zygon was alive, then it was not. My sword met its flesh, and the duel was decided. But even that is not true, not really. What is it for a creature to die when the creature itself was only ever a signifier, a condensation of something else? The Zygon has always been more than a red-skinned invader. It is fascism made body, the logic of finitism incarnate. Fascism is the worship of limitation, the refusal of the infinite, the insistence that thought must remain bound to finitude, to the closed circle of identity, territory, and death. To be fascist is to make finitude sacred, to elevate the wall, the border, the biological form itself as the final law. And so finitism becomes not just an epistemological claim, but an ontological prison. The Zygon's body, covered in sucker marks, was a declaration that there is nothing beyond surface repetition, nothing but the same unit endlessly cloned. Its centuries of hiding in Norfolk were not strategy, but a politics of stasis. Every sucker was a reduplication, a glyph of sameness stamped again and again across its flesh, as if the creature were made not of living tissue, but of photocopied skin, a parody of infinity reduced to mechanical recurrence. Its very physiology was propaganda, the message that variation is impossible, that only replication exists. The Zygon's capacity to mimic human form, so often its weapon, was never an exploration of possibility, but a demonstration of this ideology of closure. To imitate was not to invent, but to annihilate difference, to insist that the only future for the other is to be subsumed, to be made the same. The soothsayer embodied this in its purest form. Not loyalty to some distant monarch, not faith in a pope or master, but loyalty only to itself as law of closure. It crowned itself prophet of an ending, last of its kind, a survivor who spoke not of beginnings, but of termination. Its every gesture, its very survival, proclaimed the death drive as law. These are not zoological facts, but ideological ones. Every blow exchanged in the churchyard was less about survival and more about that eternal struggle, the infinite against the finite, the eventual rupture against the suffocating closure of destiny. "What are we going to do?" Penny asked, her voice barely audible, as though the fog itself might take offense if she spoke too loudly. Norfolk breathed around them in its strange, repeating way, lanes that bent back on themselves, hedgerows folding like a print from Escher's sketchbook. Every path a cul-de-sac rehearsed endlessly. The question hung in the damp air like a pin dropped into water, concentric circles moving outward until they touched every gravestone. "Go back into the church," the doctor said. His words were brisk, but inside them hid centuries of doubt, like a handkerchief concealing a blade. "Are you mad?" Penny's incredulity cracked, though even she knew madness was relative here. Against the damp Norfolk air, madness looked like pragmatism. "Come on," the doctor cried, and with that imperative they recrossed the threshold. The nave was no different than before, but absence had taken on mass. Where the Zygon's body had fallen, there was now nothing, and the nothing glowed with a density more oppressive than any corpse could have been. Penny's arm trembled as she pointed. "Look, Doctor, the Zygon's gone." "I don't know," he said, and the words clattered against the stone like dropped coins. "Should we go and find it?" she asked. "We need to before it kills again." His logic was a reassurance he no longer believed. "So where do you think it is?" "I think it's out there in the graveyard. This way." "Come on. Let's not waste time," she said, though the phrase waste time sounded absurd in a place where time itself had already been vandalized. "Try this way," the doctor commanded, and they spilled from the side door into the churchyard. The gravestones reared up like broken teeth gnawed down by centuries. Bones lay beneath, though bones no longer meant what it once had. The faction paradox had reached into the definition and untied its ligature with time. A bone could be present but never ancient. Antiquity had been expelled as an illegal thought, so that each white fragment was newborn, contemporary, stripped of its centuries as a skin is stripped of hair. To step into that churchyard was to step into an argument about what words were permitted to mean. And this was the monstrosity. Bones were once the guarantee of duration, the residue of a life that had been. Now that witness was silenced. Grief itself was made impossible, for there was no past to mourn. The dead were denied their having been. Atrocity was wiped clean as though it had never left sediment. The churchyard became obscene, a place where remembrance collapsed into nonsense, where time itself had been desecrated. "There it is," Penny said suddenly, and her arm lifted toward the mist. "Yes," the doctor answered. The Zygon stood between two leaning stones, its robe fallen back, the cross across its chest gleaming like irony sharpened into weaponry. It was not simply a monster, but a sermon, a parody of prophecy in flesh. To call it the soothsayer was not to give it a title, but to describe its very mode of being. A creature that had survived centuries only to preach that survival must end in closure. Its patience in Norfolk was less a tactic than a liturgy, a long devotion to stasis in which every day repeated the last until history itself seemed annulled. Fascism does not always march. Sometimes it waits, convinced that nothing genuinely new can interrupt its vigil. The Zygon's body was a temple to that conviction, and the graveyard its congregation. "I'll wait here," Penny said, retreating half a step. "Okay," the doctor replied. He moved forward. The Zygon's mouth twisted as it spoke. "So you come back to face me?" "Yes, to tell you to leave. Leave this planet at once." "Not yet. Not until the doctor is dead." Penny's voice rose sharply, half gallows humor, half desperate invention. "Why don't you have a duel?" The doctor seized the suggestion like prophecy. "Yes, good idea. A duel, then. Do you accept, Zygon? A duel?" "Yes, doctor, I do," the Zygon replied. Its teeth shone damply in the fog. "Only one thing, no guns, just swords. Penny." "Yes, doctor." "Bring me the swords from the TARDIS. She stopped short. "Which ones?" "The swords of Rassilon." Her voice faltered as if she had bitten into prophecy itself. "But you were told not to use them by the Time Lords." "Just bring them," the doctor snapped. She turned and ran, her footsteps dissolving into the strange echo of Norfolk's self-swallowing lanes. Each stride betrayed her, carrying her forward only to return her to the same point again, as though she were running along the crease of a folded page that refused to open. The hedgerows seemed to lean inward, repeating themselves until the countryside became less geography than pattern, a wallpaper of banality into which human action could sink without trace. Yet, through this recursive landscape, the TARDIS stood in flagrant contradiction, its blue geometry a wound in the local fabric, an object that refused the law of return. It did not belong to Norfolk, nor to repetition, nor to any catalogue of sameness. It was the possibility of the event itself, standing against the loops of stasis like a rebuke. Inside, the forbidden relics waited, heavy with Gallifrey's hypocrisy. The swords of Rassilon were not weapons, so much as archives of dread, relics whose very existence undermined the Time Lord's long charade of pacifism. Gallifrey had always made a theatre of restraint, congratulating itself on being above the barbarities of steel and blood. Yet here were the swords, polished into myth, then sealed away under prohibition so that their refusal could be rehearsed forever. They were forbidden not because they lacked power, but because they condensed Gallifrey's secret, that even a civilization priding itself on thought and temporality could not quite escape the temptation of the blade. Prohibition was part of their function, the way a curse is part of the stone that bears it. And now prophecy was being fulfilled, the prophecy Tiresias had once spoken beneath the red marble arches. "You will be forced to use the forbidden swords of Rassilon." The future had always been tilting toward this moment, and now it arrived, iron in her hands. Penny seized them, though seized was the wrong word. They seized her. Their weight was not simply material, but temporal. Centuries pressing into her arms until her bones ached with prophecy. She carried not iron, but inevitability. And inevitability is the heaviest of burdens. The hilts bit against her palms with the authority of Gallifrey, of exile and return, of prophecy carved into the doctor's destiny before she was even born. She stumbled, not from clumsiness, but from the sheer ontological mass of what she carried. As she ran back toward the churchyard, her mouth betrayed her. A melody slipped past her lips, uninvited, automatic. a reflex older than her adulthood. Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. It was unbearable. The song had been stitched into her before she could resist, the joke of her existence written in vinyl and laughter. She had never been just Penny. She had been Penny Lane, a Beatles citation parading as a person. Teachers had hummed it when they called her name from registers. Strangers had broken into song at introductions. Her parents had worn their wit like a badge of honor, their daughter reduced to a punchline in the endless afterlife of Liverpool's export. To live as Penny Lane was to live as a quotation, a human refracted through another century's pop refrain. Her identity had never been her own. From the first day her name was called aloud in a classroom, it was not Penny who answered, but the chorus, children's voices swelling into a song they had never chosen, mocking not by malice, but by inertia. It was ritual, endless, a chant, rehearsed by others long before she was born. At university, the ritual continued, now dulled into irony, every introduction followed by the same tired smile, the same sighing, like the song, as though she were a relic of someone else's nostalgia. Lovers, too, betrayed her, humming her name as refrain while stroking her hair, reducing intimacy to pastiche, her body reabsorbed into melody. Even her silence was not hers, for it was filled by echoes of brass bands and blue suburban skies. This was the cruelty of finitism, to name a child not as a gesture toward possibility, but as an act of foreclosure, to lock her within a reference and declare her meaning complete at the moment of birth. Penny Lane was not permitted to become, she was only permitted to repeat. What does a child do when her ontology is a pun? She suffers. She considers annihilation. At night she had rehearsed ways of leaving quietly, of making the body absent so that the song might at last lose its vessel. Pills counted and recounted, knives tested against her skin, the fantasy of water filling her lungs more real than any promise of future. Death, at least, would be original. It would be hers, not borrowed. And yet she endured, though endurance became its own parody. Each day was a repetition of the last, every interaction another reminder that she was a joke told once too often. Suicide lingered always as a form of authorship, the one unscripted act left to her. If she had not yet chosen it, it was not because she did not wish to end, but because she was perversely curious to see whether the universe could at some point permit her to exist outside the refrain. Now, with the swords of Rassilon pressed against her ribs as she ran, she felt that possibility flare, not as death, but as a grotesque kind of authorship, to be the courier of the Doctor's forbidden act, to step for a moment out of the song and into history. She understood with a tremor that the prophecy Tiresias had spoken had always been about her as much as about him. The blades shone in the mist. They were not swords only, but a theatre of Gallifrey's contradictions. The Time Lords had declared them forbidden, not because they lacked power, but because they contained too much history. The prohibition itself was part of the ritual of mastery, as though by declaring the blades unusable they could still exist in the safety of myth. Here, prophecy and ban were knotted, inevitability and denial written in the same hand. The Zygon reached for its hilt with a gesture that was less choice than fulfillment. The Doctor took his blade, and it seemed to weigh not pounds, but centuries. The fog curled like an audience drawing breath before a play. For a moment, nothing moved. The graveyard seemed to lean closer, its stones crouched to listen. History itself appeared suspended, as if waiting to see whether this moment would count for more than another loop. The promise that conflict might one day produce progress felt faint here. The air thickened with the horror that time was not a line but a circle, and that all battles were only reenactments, staged again and again until meaning drained away. The Zygon embodied this horror. Its prophecy of endings was not insight but symptom, a wound rehearsed across centuries. Its very presence whispered that no act could ever truly begin, that the future was already sealed, that destiny was authored elsewhere and delivered only as repetition. To fight it was to fight that suffocating certainty. Yet the Doctor stood with his hand on the forbidden blade, and Penny, trembling with the memory of her own near surrender to annihilation, understood something that the mist itself seemed to confirm. Authorship is not bestowed, it is taken. A life named by others is a cage, and there are only two honest choices: live inside it, or tear the bars out with bleeding hands. Here, in a graveyard where time had been defaced, they would not accept another loop or a lesson. They would decide. Penny, carrying death once as a fantasy, and now carrying the swords instead, chose to live and to serve the act that would make her more than a joke. The doctor, hand closing on forbidden steel, chose to wield rather than delay. The moment would not be interpreted later. It would be written now. The blades would not follow a script. They would cut one. The circle would break. "Okay, there you go, Doctor. There you go, Zygon. Take arms. 3, 2, 1. The swords rose like contradictions. Steel struck the mist, and the air tore open. "On guard!" the doctor shouted. The Zygon lunged first, its blade heavy with centuries of waiting, a swing that carried the weight of stasis itself. The doctor met it mid-arc, sparks screaming outward, the impact rolling through the churchyard like thunder trapped in stone. Gravestones rattled, inscriptions split, moss shook loose in a green spray. The duel was not only combat, it was history being forced to choose. The Zygon struck again, its blade cutting downward with the weight of ritual, each movement less an attack than an act of liturgy. The air trembled with the solemnity of a creed rehearsed too many times, steel descending like a priest's hand in benediction twisted into curse. The ground shook beneath each blow as if the earth itself were being commanded back into obedience. The doctor did not meet liturgy with liturgy. His sword danced at strange angles, improvisations born in the moment, answering force with deviation. Where the Zygon moved as if reciting a prayer, the doctor moved as if inventing language anew, each parry an interruption, each counterstroke a refusal to let the rhythm settle. Sparks leapt upward like punctuation marks in a text no one had yet learned how to read, proof that the duel was not recitation but creation. They locked blades, steel rasped against steel, two swords leaning, neither yielding. Their faces were inches apart, breath fogging between them. "You will lose, Doctor," the Zygon growled, forcing the weight of the blade downward. "I never lose," the doctor hissed, teeth bared, every word dragging itself from his lungs. The Zygon pushed harder, and for a moment the doctor's knees bent. Penny cried out, "Come on, Doctor!" Her voice broke the rhythm, cutting across the duel like an arrow. The doctor surged upward, twisted, broke the lock, and with a roar, sent the Zygon stumbling back among the graves. Norfolk's hedges, endlessly folding back on themselves, did not merely tremble. They revealed their truth as topological failure. A geography collapsed into recursion. This was not countryside, but cul-de-sac, the universe's own dead end. A place where entropy had curled back to gnaw itself. The hedgerows were Mobius bands in vegetal form, space draped into loops that mocked forward motion, the signature of a space-time that had chosen stasis over expansion. To walk here was to trace a geodesic that refused to escape its basin, a curvature so tight that cause and effect could only circle and circle again. The sky above bent like a lens misground, light refracting into itself, rays refusing to leave the manifold. Locality dissolved. The duel was taking place inside a closed, time-like curve disguised as farmland, the very physics of Norfolk a recursion equation converging on zero. Each gust of wind was iteration, each turn of leaf a simulation of progress masking only return. The air had the quality of false vacuum, metastable, waiting for a decay that never arrived. Here was the world's event horizon in miniature, a dead pocket of space-time where infinities did not open outward but collapsed inward, suffocating in their own gravity. Norfolk was not land but limit, a boundary condition scribbled at the edge of cosmology, proof that even the universe admits to dead ends. The doctor's sword arced, clean, final, and struck the Zygon's blade aside. With one swift motion he pressed the edge to the creature's chest. His breath came ragged, his coat torn, his arm trembling with exhaustion and refusal. "There," he said. "I win. Your reign of terror is over. No last words?" The Zygon's mouth widened into something between sneer and prophecy. "You will lose, Doctor." "I never lose." The fog swirled as if listening. "The silent and ending, darkness to time is coming." The words were not threat but incantation. The air shifted, hedges folding tighter, the graveyard bowing inward as though the world itself believed the Zygon's sermon. "What do you mean?" the doctor demanded, his blade still fixed against its chest. "Your time is running out." "I don't think so." "Everything must end sometime, Doctor Who." The silence that followed was thicker than sound. The words bent the moment downward, pulled at it, threatened to close it. Penny's voice shook. "What does this mean?" "I don't know yet," the doctor said, his hand steady but his voice taut. But we'll find out eventually. Get me the gun. She moved, almost stumbling, her hand shaking as she placed the weapon in his palm. Here it is, Doctor. The blade slipped lower, the gun rose. There, he said. It's all over. Come on, Penny. Bring your swords. Let's go. But Over refused to arrive. The Zygon's body collapsed into the grass, yet its words lingered, smeared across the fog like ash on parchment. The duel was won. But the victory was not conclusion. It was fracture, rupture, opening. The event had happened. A hole had been torn in the banality of Norfolk, in the closure of prophecy, in the desecrated bones that refused to age. And through that hole poured something unnameable. Over, not over, not over, the word buckles, mutates, drips, hedges snarl inward, lane devours lane, geometry liquefies into hunger. Time equals cul-de-sac of the cosmos. I read, closed time-like curve disguised as village road, entropy clawing at its own tail. Doctor walking equals incision across manifold. Sword equals tear in grammar. Every step bleeds algebra. Geodesic, incomplete, future unpinned. Truth insists. Penny's breath trembles, words warp. I am a author ship splinter, naming the name that named me. Mouth seeding spores of language, eyes lit with collapsing constellations. Zygon equals corpse. Corpse equals prophecy still speaking. Prophecy glitching. Everything must end sometime. Becomes. Anything must some every time end. Must thing some every must end. End. Language froths, graveyard convulses. Epitaphs disgorge vowels like teeth. Alphabet liquefies into mulch. Fracture equals trismulic spiraling nor dash. Hedge equals moblink throat fold, tessellate ooze. Doctor equals ventral cut, diagonal gash, infinituk screech dash. Penny equals author spore, meta voice, melt throat glimmerer. Limit as closure approaches infinity equals r dash rupture. Rupture equals script, vrrghgnash. Tongueless splkkkttt. Truth equals uncount count countless countertint dash. Norfolk equals null pocket, entropy gulch, lanes collapsing into skeen equals gul lush. Glorshed marrow time fract. Sword clash equals vvvvvverrr, sestibabishambima, sabdibimamsi beam sent vbimahams, brido same seam of fancy, but the stay machine at say, the saber sheban and seaman seam at sabat siba, his fabum saber same sabat same besamasi, his faber seam of beaver saber same ishium seam james state seam same sensian seam fame splkkkttt. Oh, 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 oh.